Okay, well, welcome everybody to today's session. Today we're going to talk about, apologies, I'm trying to share my screen. Give me a moment. There we go. So today's session for this tea break webinar is visualizing flow using Flourish. And we're going to focus on the Sankey and the alluvial diagrams. My name is Mafe and I'm a member of the support and content team, and I'll be delivering today's session. So, oops, apologies for that. There we go. So this is the structure of the session for today. We're going to be looking at the basics of flow, what is flow and how can you represent it? And we're going to go over a little bit of history so it can help you understand how to use our templates better. Then we're going to focus on how to format your data to actually build Sankey diagrams using Flourish. This is by far the most common issue our users have with the template. So I'm going to take a little bit more time and go over this so you can leave the session feeling confident in how you format your data to build your Sankeys. Then we're going to do a demonstration with Flourish. I'm going to be visualizing asylum applications from 2020. And then we're going to do a little bit of a recap to see what we learned today. Do not worry, and all of the materials that I'm going to be going over today are going to be available at the end of the session, and you will be able to download them on our website, from our website. So what is flow? Flow is basically the representation of changing states. It can be a process, it can be an evolution, or it can be a series of before and after, or even a classification and sub-classification. Now, we can represent flow using different charts. As I said, we're going to focus on the Sankey diagram, and this is essentially what a Sankey is made of. It's made of nodes and links. The nodes are these rectangles here to the left and to the right of the screen, and they are united by these branches here. They're called links, and the thickness of the link is determined by a specific value. So the wider the link, the bigger the magnitude of the flow. And then anything that's here in between the source node and the target node, it's called a mid-step. That's essentially it. At the end of the day, even though they look very complicated, Sankeys are just made of these two simple elements. Now, let's go over a little bit of history to see how flow is useful and what it can help you represent. So if you're a data visualization fan, you've probably seen this chart before. This is Napoleon's Russian campaign of 1812 by Charles Minard. It's a very famous graph. And the reason why I bring it up here today is because of these two lines that we see here, this beige one and this black one. Here, Minard was representing the number of soldiers in Napoleon's campaign. And we can see that the width of the line is actually decreasing throughout their journey to Moscow. And then when they went back, they almost disappeared, essentially because this was a huge military failure. And this chart is representing basically how their numbers decreased considerably. So this is a very good example of how flow can help you tell very powerful stories and convey your message clearly to an audience. And the second bit of history I have for you is this energy efficiency of a steam engine diagram, which was made by Matthew Henry Phineas Ryle Sankey, whom, as you may guess at this point, gave the name to this type of charts. And essentially here we have a much more complex visualization of flow and the branches that are just like dividing and just moving alongside the visualization. So this is far more complex than Minard's attempt at visualizing flow. And this is basically where our Sankey diagrams come from. And they're very similar to what we do today. So it's quite remarkable the fact that in almost a century and a little bit more, they haven't changed at all. And hopefully this bit of an introduction can help you see what's the future applications for Sankey for you and how you can use it to visualize your data. So now we're going to go over how should we format data in order to build a Sankey. And essentially the characteristics of data sets, I guess, arranged to build a Sankey are these three ones. They're in long format, they have source and a target, and they have values. So the long format characteristic, it's very important. This basically means that your data set should be organized in a way in which every row represents a single entry. The main characteristics of these data sets is that they are very repetitive, they are taller, meaning that they have more rows than they have columns, And they may look a little bit odd at starts because we're more used to data sets kind of like reducing data to its minimum or gathering a lot of data, whereas this one basically expand on the data. The second characteristic is source and target. Essentially, if you think about your data for building a Sankey, you only need to think of two things. What's my source and what's my target? It really helps to identify in which category your data is going to be. And this is 90% of what you need to build a Sankey, properly identifying where should it start and where should it lead. And last but not least, values. Some data sets for Sankeys can actually omit values, because if you have your data formatted correctly, you have several rows that will tell the Flourish editor actually how to distribute data. And so that would actually change the thicknesses of the links, and it will build a Sankey as you want it to. So you can build a Sankey without having any values, but if you do, that's essentially going to change the width of the links of your chart. And this is how it looks. This is an excerpt of the data set we're going to be working on today, as I said, which is refugee settlement in 2020. And we have our origin column here. In this case, we have country of origin, and this is going to be the origin node, which would be the left side of our Sankey. Then we have the target node, which would be the right side, so where these branches are going to go into. Here we have two more columns that are telling the editor essentially where is it coming from and where is it going to in numeric value, and number of cases of asylum, in this case, asylum seekers, which is the thickness of the link. And as we can, if we interpret this row by row, basically, we would see that this row right here, Afghanistan, will be one branch going to the target Europe from 0 to 1. 0 would be Afghanistan, 1 would be Europe. And the number of cases is 286, and this would be the thickness of the line. So bear with me, we're almost going to the editor. I'm just going to go over some of the settings and some of the things you can do with Flourish before actually moving to a live demonstration. So some of the basic settings that you need to take into consideration when building your Sankey are the following. The first is that the minimum data bindings are your source and your target. That is the minimum requirement for you to actually build a Sankey with Flourish. Then you can add the value. You can bind the column with the value to determine the width of the link. You can also add a column filter if you want your Sankey to, if you want to allow your users rather to go over your Sankey using filters. As I said, you can add a step from and a step to have the mid-steps that we saw before. And you can also format your Sankey to be either an alluvial diagram, a Sankey, or a multi-step. So what are the difference between these two? Essentially, a Sankey is anything that only has two nodes, so your source and your target. And if they have multiple steps, they can either be an alluvial or a multi-step Sankey. Difference between the two is that the multi-step Sankey is arbitrary, has arbitrary flows. There is no process going on here. Here we're just like visualizing changes states, in this case of energy. And we see how some nodes just disappear or how they move along. And there's no order to this process. Whereas on the alluvial side, there is clearly a distribution that like follows a discrete flow. So when you have your data, you will possibly know which chart is of most use for you, but still we're going to look into it in the editor. And then for further customization, you can change with Flourish the order of the nodes. You can change the spread, which is the space between the different steps on the multi-step Sankey or an alluvial diagram. You can change your node appearance, the branch or the link appearance, so color palettes, opacity, etc. And you can change also the labels. So without further ado, we're now going to the editor. Okay, lovely. So I'm just going to quickly go over the chat, and can you see the screen? I'm hoping you can.
Yeah.
Okay, lovely. Yeah, just making sure, because otherwise it would be quite tragic. There we go. So this is the source of the data we're going to be working on. This is UNHCR asylum applications for 2020. And this is what the data looks like once I downloaded it. The only things that I've added are the region of origin for my countries, and same for the asylum application. So I'm just going over this really quickly so we understand what we're doing on the editor. So we have country of origin, we have the ISO code for the country of origin, for the refugees. Then we have the country of asylum. And essentially here we have the number of people who have applied. So this would be my data set already cleaned up for the Sankey. I just kept the country of origin, the continent of origin, country of destination, and the country of destination, the continent for the country of destination, and the cases. And I'm going to copy this data, and I'm going to go to Flourish, to my template chooser right here, and I'm selecting a Sankey. So as you may notice, you already have a sample Sankey. We always recommend users to check this and to check the data tab and how this is formatted, because this is going to help you in the long run to see how you can wrangle your data appropriately. But since I already did that, I'm just going to clear this sheet and paste my data. And I'm going to do the binding. So country of origin is going to be my source target. That's perfect. The country of asylum is going to be my target, because I want to represent the flow between these two. So where are refugees coming from and where are they asking for asylum? And then the cases is going to be my values. So that's the thickness of my links. And if I go to my preview tab, this is what I get. Okay, so this would be the basic shape of a Sankey diagram. And now I can proceed and do further customization. So first we have the formats here. When you're doing a Sankey, there's really not much you can set here, because alluvial or Sankey are going to look exactly the same, because we don't have steps to activate this mode, but we're going to look at that with another example. Then we have the node order. So this essentially is how these nodes appear on the screen. So when you click reduce overlaps, which is our default mode, Flourish will try to minimize the overlaps of the links as much as possible. So all of this, it will try to reduce it by the number of iterations. So the higher the number of iterations, the less the overlap. So if I decrease this, for example, to 1, even though it's not really perceptible because we have quite a lot of branches, you could see that it made a little bit of a change. But if I increase it, for example, to 30, that reduced the amount of links that are on top of each other. Now, I also have another possibility, which is matched data set. So if I go back to my data, and for example, I wrangled this to be alphabetical, and I go back here, and I click this, now I see that it's wrangled it on alphabetical order by my country of origin. And it did it perfectly. So we know that it's working, and that's brilliant. More things we can set here, the node width. So this opaque rectangles, they can be thinner, for example, if I set them to 10, or they can be thicker if I set them to something higher, like say 50. And I think I'm going to go for 30. The vertical node align is going to separate the nodes more or less. So if I click, for example, on 0, I basically get them all pasted together. And I quite like them to be more separated, because I think that it gives more clarity to what we're trying to work here. Top and bottom margin are just the margins of the visualization itself. So I'm going to set them both to 10. And I'm done with this basic settings. Now I can go to node and link appearance. And this is where we change essentially the colors and the opacity. So one thing I like to do with Sankeys, because they can be quite overwhelming with so much color, is I'm actually going to edit this color palette. And I'm going to just copy this particular color for later. And I'm going to get rid of all the colors except for one. I'm just going to keep the gray. And if you click on the little square here, you can actually customize this further. I'm going to make it a little bit lighter, like so. And I want to focus on the case of Afghanistan. So now I can just use a color override by doing so, based on the color. And that did exactly what I wanted to, which is it highlighted the country that I wanted to with the color I selected. And this is a really powerful way of telling your stories by muting down everything else on the Sankey. And I think it's a very powerful resource that you can use for your own stories. We can also play with the link opacity a bit more. So if we make them fully opaque, which would be 1, you can see that they are just completely opaque and they match the color of the node. I like them around 50%, I think. And then we have the defocus opacity, which is the opacity for the nodes that are not currently highlighted. So I'm going to make the case here. If I click other asylum countries, we can see how muted the background is. If I lower it down a little bit to maybe 0.1, we can see that that is very, very, very much lighter. And I'm going to just leave it to 25. I think that's best. And I'm done with link and appearance. Now we have the labels. So your labels can be moved to either the inside or the outside. If you move it on the outside, maybe some labels could be lost depending on your screen size. So it's always, I mean, good to check your labels and, you know, to test this on different devices. The max space for labels is a percentage on the width of your screen. And I believe you cannot do more than, yes, you cannot do more than 40%. So I'm going to set mine to 30. And that should change a little bit of how much space I actually have available for the labels. In text colors, if it's fixed, you can only set one color. If it's auto, it's going to match the color of your nodes. And if it's none, well, you will basically, you wouldn't have any labels. I'm just going for fixed. And the outline, because I'm going to favor my, if I were to favor them in the inside, then the outline is basically that white background that I have on the outside. I'm just going to set them to none, and you can set the width, you can do further customization here. And same for the font style, I'm just going to max them to about 12 and min them to 9. And maybe set them like so. Okay, yeah, I'm quite happy with that. You can also select whether to show or not show the values in your notes. So if you do all, you would get all of the numeric values. If you do none, you would only get the labels. And same with the link values. So the link values are this numbers that appear here. If I said all, I would get all of the values, which in my opinion is a bit overwhelming in this particular case because I have quite a lot of branches. If I do none, then not even when I'm highlighting one link would I get those values. So I'm just going to keep them unfocused. And that's it. If I go to animations, this is going to change how fast will the links load whenever you are doing, whenever your user is actually loading your visualization. So I can do them 3, it's what we recommend. If you do 8 or 5, might be a little bit slower. So if I were to reload this really quickly, yeah, you can see that the animation is a tad slower, and that's setting there particularly. And all the other settings are quite common to our Flourish templates. Your number formatting, in order if you wanted to make this say dot instead of a period instead of a comma, or a prefix if they were percentages, etc. And your layout. I'm going to add a quick header. It's going to be refugees from Afghanistan in 2020. And there we go. So that is the first thing I wanted to show you, which is how to build a simple Sankey diagram. But now, when looking at my data, I had this continent of asylum, which I think is going to make a really good case for saying where have the refugees been resettled. So if I wanted to make this, oops, sorry, I'm getting like this extra space here. Yes, so if I wanted to, insert a sheet, add an extra step to my Sankey to showcase this asylum continent, this is what I would do. I would duplicate all of my data. And I'm going to change the headers here just for demonstration purposes and to really make stick the idea of the source and the target data formatting that I told you about earlier. So this is going to be my source node, which is the country of origin. And I don't care for this column because that was the continent. And this is going to be my target node. I'm going to move this quickly here. Okay, these are my values. And I'm going to create 2 new columns, step from and step 2. So what we're trying to do here is to format our data. So we have 3 steps on our Sankey. We'll have a source column, which is going to be the origin. We will have a mid step, which is ideally going to be the continent where people have been resettled. And then we will have the final column, which is going to be the country where they have been resettled. So I'm going to add here 2 numeric values, change it to 2. And I'm going to apply this to all my elements of my data set. And I'm going to copy all of this and go to the very end of my data set. And I will add 2 rows. So again, column A is going to be my source column. I'm already saying that I want my target column to be the region. Now I'm adding to my target column the countries. And I'm going to duplicate here all of my regions and add them to my source column. And I'm going to copy all my values, place them here. Now I'm changing this from 1 to 2 to 2 to 3. And applying that to all. And once again. And now I can get rid of column C altogether because I don't need it anymore. And I can get rid of this blank. And this looks a little bit weird. It's unusual, right, for what we're used to seeing on a data set. But this is what's going to make the difference when we actually bring it to the editor. So if I go back to my visualization, and let me see if I can just, yeah, I'll just go to Flourish template really quickly. There we go. I'm going to duplicate this, and I'm going to my data tab, and I'm going to again clear this, paste what I just done. Brilliant. And so now my source is going to be my A column, perfect. My target is going to be my B column. The value of the link is going to be the C, and my step from is going to be D, and my step 2, E. So we can already see the difference between what we've done before, what we did before, and this new chart. We essentially added this mid step here to highlight the region. And what I'm going to do here in Node Link and Appearance is I'm going to change my override to highlight Europe, right? And now we're telling a completely different story. Now we're highlighting how most of the refugees are being resettled or asking for refuge in Europe, actually, compared to other countries, compared to North America, Oceania, Asia, and South America, right? So for this, we are doing a alluvial step-by-step Sankey because we have ordered steps that we're trying the user to go through. We have, again, our origin country, then we have our continent of settlement, and then we have our country of settlement. The based on step values would make sense here if I were to determine whether this node should be more to the left or to the right, and that basically depends on your step from and your step to values. If you're doing years, for example, and you put a higher year here, say 2010, 2013, and then 2013, 2020, you could change whether to organize this evenly, which would spread the screen equally, or based on the actual distance between the numbers. But here, because it might have equal intervals, meaning I only have 1 to 2 and 2 to 3, this wouldn't make much of a difference. One thing to be aware of is that with this type of chart, because the step is actually determined by a numeric value and it cannot be a string, if you activate your node headings, which would show you what's the title for each of these steps, you will only get numeric values, again, because there's no way right now from Flourish to actually set this to be a string. So that's something to take into consideration, which is that labeling in this type of template, it's not ideal, at least for the node headings right here. So I'm actually going to hide them, and I'm going to change my header and just say something like most refugees ask for asylum in Europe. And maybe I could even, I don't know, add another, here we go. I could add another custom override, and for Venezuela, maybe go for a red color if I wanted to highlight more information, if I wanted to do more overrides to tell different stories. I mean, the possibilities with the Sankey are really broad, and I wanted to say endless, but obviously there's a limit to it. But definitely you can do a lot of things within Flourish to tell your story and to visualize flow better. And yes, this is the demonstration that I wanted to do. And sorry, I'm just going to quickly go over back to my slides and just going over the recap. So what we've done today is basically we've learned how to represent flow. And we know now that flow is good to represent changes in states and evolution over time or structure. We've also looked at how flow data looks, which is repetitive. It's one row per record, tends to be tall rather than wide, meaning that you will have more rows than columns, and that flow can be either arbitrary or discrete. Arbitrary would be a multi-step Sankey where you don't have to follow a particular order, but rather just you're just interested in the change in state. Or it could be again discrete, which would be an alluvial diagram in which you would have to go through each of the phases orderly. Here are some of the resources. Again, the slides are going to be available for you at the end of the webinar. We have a couple of help docs on how to build your own Sankey or how to specify the order of your nodes. That is the whole thing about reducing overlaps or matching your data set. And we also have a couple of blog posts on how to make Sankey charts and alluvial diagrams. If you have any questions after the webinar, you can, of course, shoot us an email at support@flourish.studio. We're available there to answer all of your queries. And next up, in 2 weeks from now, you will have the GAN template webinar, which is a new release that we're very excited about, the 14th of September, and we hope to see you there too. And this has been everything for today. Thank you very much.